Over the last 5 days, I've spent my evenings listening to every Paramore track released. From their punky rock to their synth pop, their style has changed quite a bit over the last couple decades. Today, I'll be giving my first impressions and thoughts on their music. Jumping back to 2005, we are introduced to Paramore's debut album, All We Know Is Falling. At the time, lead singer Hayley Williams was just 16 when they created their well-known pop-punk statement. Most of their songs reflect an on and off guitar dynamic contrasting with the ranging vocals. Some of their most famous songs include All We Know and Pressure, both related to the departure of Jeremy Davis, their lead bass player at the time. The guitar and bass, though, are fun to get into since they have some pretty amazing riffs heard in Brighter and Franklin. The later songs in the album, however, may feel a bit repetitive and structured compared to the first few. In all fairness, however, this album is a great developing track towards the band and is a nice little warm-up for their next couple punk-centered, energetic albums. Now next up, we have one of their most recognized albums, Riot. Released in 2007, this album contains their most iconic rock eras, including That's What You Get, Crush Crush Crush, and Misery Business, their most well-renowned singles to date. However, it is often because of these hits that their other music gets shouted behind. Most of their songs in this album all retain that pop-punk feeling and heightens their original attempt and atmosphere with All We Know Is Falling. Hayley, post-production of the album, stated, "Riot literally means an unbridled burst of emotions. When we were writing, it seemed like our thoughts and emotions were coming out so fast that we couldn't control them." These tracks come in a variety of different messages, from false-hearted relationships to the stresses of media and popularity. With the vocal talent of Hayley on a steep rise, it's safe to say that this album heavily contributed to the band's mainstream popularity over the next few years. With their newfound major success, it was getting harder to keep up with the pace of not just the demand, but also the band. But they still managed to release Brand New Eyes in September of 2009. This album symbolized rage and regret, elevating their rock and punk style even further. Even Hayley herself states that the band was a mess and still trying to figure out herself. Their hit songs Careful and Ignorance specifically target on living life to the fullest and also towards her own bandmates with the struggle to keep on going together. Many Paramore fans are strongly into Ignorance, and even though it is in my top 5, I personally believe that Brick by Boring Brick, a song about a little girl and her own reality, just sounds a bit better with the guitar riffs and vocals. Hayley's voice fully maturing towards this genre is cool to see throughout the last few tracks, and that fully reflects in All I Wanted, with some of the most incredible vocal performances I have ever heard. But after all the success, 2 founding members of the band, the Farrow brothers, left. They were seemingly disengaged after tension between Josh and Hayley escalated, and they just wanted to move on to other pursuits of life. Here on out, however, the time gaps in between each album started to show. Throughout 2010 and 2011, they've spent countless nights touring as they began writing and recording their self-titled album, Paramore, in late 2012. With their experimental pop rock and somewhat toned-down alternative rock approach, it was their first #1 album on the US Billboard 200 and also peaked at the top spot in other countries during 2013. This album was meant to be a restatement of their band and the start of a new era. Ain't It Fun is a song about transitioning into adulthood and self-approval, becoming one of the most well-known singles of the album. Ain't it fun? Now, Still Into You, and Daydreaming were all also released as singles respectively. For me, this album contains some newer bubblegum pop surprises that were definitely most prominent in Still Into You, one of the best sounding tracks from the album, in my opinion. However, just because some of these new appearances start to show, doesn't mean that they've lost their former punk identities either. You can still hear those fast drumming and guitar lines that withstood through most of the songs. This album is also one of the 2 albums from the band that has a deluxe edition, including 2 new tracks, a demo, and live performances of their previous hits. After their self-titled tour that concluded in 2015, things started to go downhill for the band. Jeremy Davis, ex-bassist, left the band calling Haley a backstabber. She went on to temporarily leave the band herself in mid-2015 to help cope with depression, then later joining after guitarist Taylor York began sending her demos of new music. Zach Farrow, who previously left the band with his brother in 2010, rejoined with the motivation of getting to catch up with old friends.
Just let me cry a little bit longer.
After recording all of their lines in 2016, they released their 5th studio album, After Laughter, in May of 2017. Even without that same major success from the years prior, they still managed to pull off a great album, and personally, one of my favorites. Introducing a new synth-pop and guitar combo, most of the songs in this album were about dealing with depression and exhaustion, one of my favorites being Rose-Colored Boy and Caught in the Middle.
I'm just a little bit caught in the middle.
Another reason why this album really feels timeless is the heightened creativity and uniqueness compared to their other albums. Pool and 26 sound like experimental releases at first that just naturally fit my style. And of course, shoutouts to Hard Times, Told You So, and Fake Happy, all of which sounding mostly different from one another and yet still retaining that hit single vibe. For many fans, this was a surprising yet enjoyable refresher for the band and their music. After a summer tour in 2018 and Haley battling through depression, divorce, and mental disorders in 2019, the band finally decided to take a well-deserved break.
Writing that essay that I wrote in 2018 was one of the first times I really spoke out about depression and having wanted to die. I would come home from recording After Laughter and I wouldn't even feel any joy, and it was so strange.
Haley went off to become an independent artist during the pandemic and planned on going on tour with their first solo album, but that inevitably got canceled. Soon after, however, Paramore announced their single, This Is Why, as well as their North American tour in 2022. They released their final album with Atlantic Records the following year, named after the same single. As their first post-punk album, the sound doesn't fully resonate as a complete post-punk styled album to me. Even though production could have been better, they do have some groovy tracks such as The News, C'est Comme Ça, and Crave.
So I crave.
The majority of this album is relating to the sheer roller coaster ride during the pandemic era and also post-COVID. Apart from the further detachment from the usual fast-paced guitar lines, it's the type of album that grows on you. I wasn't so sure if I enjoyed the different sound at first since it was somewhat startling to not hear the usual band music genre. However, it's definitely not as bad as my original thoughts after giving it another chance. But that doesn't wrap up the entirety of the album just yet. Later that same year, they released a remix album compiled with many different artists and creators' takes on the tracks. The variety is fun to listen throughout the album, and some of my personal favorites are You First, remixed by Remy Wolf, and Crave, remixed by Claude. I also personally enjoy remix tracks because they convey the same meaning through another artist's eyes. It's cool to see Paramore getting involved with other creators and having their take on their songs. After touring around the Americas, Europe, and Oceania over the last couple of years, they're now experimenting with different sounds and continuing to support their career in music. I can't wait to see where they continue to go from here with more types of music, or if they'll resort back to their guitar leads and riffs. Thank you for watching this new type of video that I've been working on for a while now. I wanted it to be something that I had a passion for while also reaching out to a new audience. I never fully got into Paramore until a couple weeks ago, and I just decided to go through a marathon through all their songs. I hope you guys enjoyed. See ya.